all the other 43 states will vote predictably for either Harris or Trump, we think. But within those 7 states, there are various combinations available to the candidates that could produce one winner or the other. So if Harris holds the 3 Rust Belt states in the north, which Joe Biden flipped in 2020, so that's Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, she will hold the White House. It doesn't matter what happens in the other 4 swing states. If Trump flips back one or more of those, it becomes a lot more difficult for Harris to win, probably impossible, actually, especially without the biggest one of them that carries 19 votes in the Electoral College, and that's Pennsylvania.
The US Vice President Kamala Harris is setting out the closing arguments of her presidential campaign tonight with a big speech at the site of Donald Trump's rally on January the 6th, 2021, before that violent attack on the US Capitol. She's expected to accuse her rival of trying to deepen the divisions in American society. Trump himself is also about to address a campaign rally in the battleground state of Pennsylvania. The former president spoke to reporters at his Mar-a-Lago ranch earlier and defended the controversial event he held at Madison Square Gardens in New York, where some of the warm-up acts made racist remarks.
At Madison Square Garden, the love in that room, it was breathtaking, and you could have filled it many, many times with the people that were unable to get in, but politicians that have been doing this for a long time, 30 and 40 years, said there's never been an event so beautiful. It was like a love fest, an absolute love fest, and it was my honor to be involved.
Well, David Charter is the US Assistant Editor for The Times. Good evening, David.
Good evening, Carol from Washington, D.C.
Great to have you with us. Let's start with the Vice President, Kamala Harris. She is due on stage anytime now to deliver what is a really important speech, isn't it, tonight?
Yeah, this is being billed as her big closing argument speech, and it's been arranged with the visuals in mind. She's at the exact same spot where Donald Trump stood on January the 6th, 2021, and spoke to a very large crowd of his supporters before a lot of them marched off down to the US Capitol, and some of them, of course, rioted there, broke in, rampaged through the halls of Congress. So it's designed to show her as presidential with it's dark now, the White House is lit up behind her. It's gonna look pretty stunning. The question is, and there I should say, there's an enormous crowd, estimated at between 40 and 50,000. The ellipse area, which is the fenced-off part of the lower park beneath the White House, is full, and so the crowd has spilled out onto the mall, the very large grassy area in the middle of Washington. But the question is, how will the rest of America perceive it? Will they see her as presidential, or will they see her as a creature of Washington, supported by the Capitol, because there's a massive turnout here, probably the biggest crowd of the whole election for any rally. And could that backfire? Could it make her look like the establishment candidate when the country wants the insurgency, really, that's the Donald Trump campaign?
Well, Donald Trump himself tonight is going to be in Pennsylvania, and he's speaking in an area which has got a lot of Latino voters after that hugely controversial event at the weekend in Madison Square Gardens, where some of the remarks, they were from the warm-up acts, not from Trump himself, were frankly pretty offensive, in particular to Puerto Ricans.
Yes, there was a reminder, perhaps, of the Trump presidency, with a joke from a comedian about Puerto Rico being a floating island of garbage in the ocean. And Trump, well, first of all, he said he was holding a press conference today at Mar-a-Lago, which turned out to be another hour-long speech from Trump, actually with some very powerful messages from bereaved mothers whose daughters have been killed allegedly by migrants. But there was no apology. This is pretty normal for Trump. There was no looking back at the controversy at that press conference, and there were no questions. It wasn't much of a press conference. But he has mentioned elsewhere that again, characteristically for Trump, he doesn't know the comedian, and he didn't hear the comedian. He doesn't know anything about it, of course. So he's trying to ignore that it happened, and move on with his campaign, which, as I say, the actual policy or the actual messages in his closing argument, which, by the way, was Kamala Harris broke it, Trump will fix it. They were pretty powerful, but of course, as so often with Trump, rather overshadowed by controversy.
Interesting that Donald Trump has been making a particular pitch to Latino voters who in the past have perhaps tended to vote Democrat. And it does seem as though Trump has been making some inroads into that, picking up some support in those Latino communities.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing in the polls, and that's why Harris hasn't had a big breakaway in the southern states, the southern swing states, like particularly Nevada or Arizona, which have large Hispanic populations, like a quarter of the population of those states, pretty much. And it's because more and more those voters are prepared to give Trump a look. They like what he says about the economy and inflation. He came up with, especially for Nevada, he came up with his no tax on tips policy. There's a lot of employees there in the casinos and restaurants who live off tips, and that was seen as an attractive policy. So much so that the Harris campaign pretty quickly followed it with its own pledge of no tax on tips a couple of weeks later. But it's really a trend that the election watchers have noticed, that Trump's very scathing remarks and about illegal migrants causing crime, and his plans for a massive roundup and deportation of people in the country illegally, a lot of whom will be Hispanic from Central and South America. They're not causing him trouble with the settled Latino community. Quite the reverse. There are plenty of voters there who say, yes, we came through the legal migration routes, and we don't think people should be living in the country illegally. And they like Trump's message.
Yeah, I'm just looking at a report about Puerto Ricans for Trump making their way to that rally tonight. Absolutely dismissive of those jokes made by some of the warm-up acts, and saying that they believe that a second Trump administration would benefit Latinos. I mean, that's not the only group of voters where Trump seems to be unexpectedly, perhaps, picking up support this time around.
Yeah, this is another reason why it looks like Trump is ahead in Georgia. Georgia has the third highest black population of any state in America. And the black vote was very important for Joe Biden winning there by a very, very narrow margin, 0.23% of the vote, like 11,780 votes, famously, out of 5 million. And it's because younger black men in particular are much more likely to give Trump a look now. It comes down to an appeal for them being overlooked by the Democrats. He's campaigned hard on the Democrats have not done anything for you. They've not made your economic circumstances better. In fact, they've made it worse. And also Trump's indefatigable, aggressive form of campaigning is really cutting through. It's seen as more attractive than the Harris style.
Kamala Harris's speech, we're told that she's going to be focusing on how her rival Donald Trump, wants to increase divisions in society, and talking about the way that he has sought to try to defy the law. Tell us a bit more about her approach and how that is working.
Well, Harris, the whole point, to come back to where we started, the whole point about Harris starting this final week of campaigning on the ellipse, where American democracy was thrown into doubt that day on January the 6th. The members of Congress were running for their lives when Trump supporters were breaking into Congress and marauding through the halls of the US Capitol. And that's in some way seems to have been fading from the memory, especially given under the Harris and Biden administration, of course, the inflation, which has been like an aggregate, I think, a cumulative inflation of well over 20% in all of these swing states, is a much more immediate concern to voters. So Harris is trying to remind them just what happened under Trump, just what may have been forgotten or perhaps deprioritized as people struggle to get by.
We're just a week out now from Election Day, although, of course, some early voting has already started. And the polls are really very tight indeed. I'm just looking at the Times' latest poll of polls in the projected overall share, gives Kamala Harris a couple of points lead. But that when you break it down to this electoral votes, because of course each state delivers a certain number of electoral votes, doesn't it? That actually Trump could emerge the winner.
Yeah, it's worth reminding, of course, that the president is not elected by a simple majority of Americans. The state by state, there are state by state contests, and each state has a certain weight in the electoral college that actually does vote on the president. So the bigger states carry more weight. And the way that the maths works out means that there are 5, 6, or 7 states that are really in play. All the other 43 states will vote predictably for either Harris or Trump, we think. But within those 7 states, there are various combinations available to the candidates that could produce one winner or the other. So if Harris holds the 3 Rust Belt states in the north, which Joe Biden flipped in 2020, so that's Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, she will hold the White House. It doesn't matter what happens in the other 4 swing states. If Trump flips back one or more of those, it becomes a lot more difficult for Harris to win, probably impossible, actually, especially without the biggest one of them that carries 19 votes in the Electoral College, and that's Pennsylvania.
And we're hearing that if the result is as tight as the polls suggest, that it could take, not just hours after the polls close, but even days to work out who's actually won.
That's all down to exactly how close it is, because most of those states have taken measures to speed up their vote counting. It took 3.5 days in 2020. We didn't know till Saturday morning that Joe Biden was the president. In fact, that was when Pennsylvania announced it, or when Pennsylvania became clear, I should say. Another quirk of the system is that it's the news media that calls the states when the tallies of votes that are continually being updated as more and more are confirmed, when they become obvious that a candidate has won, the media, the Associated Press, actually is seen as the gold standard that calls the state. And we don't know the final tallies for a couple of weeks after that, as every single last vote is verified. But this time, all the early voting, and there's been a lot in person as well as postal voting, is being processed so that it can be counted very quickly on election day in most of the swing states. So we'll know in most of them on the night pretty much how they're going. However, Pennsylvania has not been able to speed up its system significantly and is expected to take a few days. So if it does all come down to Pennsylvania, we will be waiting again in this agonizing way to see who's won.
It is going to be fascinating. Plenty of special coverage here on Times Radio, of course, next week. Just finally, David, we've got 1 week of this campaign still to go. Obviously, lots of rallies and presumably then a big focus from both of the candidates on those swing states that you've been talking about.
Yeah, this is an unusual move by Harris to have a big rally in Washington because the District of Columbia votes, there's only 3 of them in the Electoral College. They're not in doubt at all. It's definitely going to vote for her. But the whole point of this is to get media coverage, and it'll be interesting to see if some of the conservative networks follow the whole speech, as they did for Trump's press conference earlier today in Mar-a-Lago in Florida. Another state that, of course, is not really in doubt. We're pretty sure that Florida will vote for Trump. It was a swing state. Memories go back to 2000 and just how close it was between Bush and Gore. But now it's trended towards the Republicans. But I think this is the end of the big set pieces away from the swing states. We're going to see them crisscrossing those 7 states that are in play right up to the last minute.
David Charter, US Assistant Editor for The Times.